Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say how special it is. I mean, Zevi, when I called him last week to give a shiur at Garden Shul on Kabbalah, the Sefirot, the soul map, we didn't realize at the time how it evolved. We asked Zevi if he could expand on that class to turn it into a 4-week lecture series that would really give all participants a deeper, clearer, and broad understanding of the Kabbalah itself, as well as some of its fundamental concepts. So really a very big thank you, Zev Slavin, live from Israel.
Thank you, Rabbi Ashi. Great to see you guys again. And I'm really excited how this turned from a one-off into an extended series. I think we all felt that doing this as a one-off did not do it justice. Okay, so let us begin with some very basic definitions, just to set the stage. And then we will set into more of what we're going to be focusing on in particular. So, introduction to Kabbalah. What is Kabbalah, firstly? Kabbalah, very simply in translation, means something that is received. Something that was given from another person to oneself is Kabbalah. In modern Hebrew, Kabbalah is a receipt because it's what you get back after you give your payment to the waiter. In classical Hebrew, Kabbalah is very often referred to as any teaching. Mashe kibalti mirabotai, as we say in the Talmud, whatever I received from my masters, is something which is received. Now, the term Kabbalah came to be referring specifically to things that were received in a more secret or private way. Something that was not just taught to the masses, but was taught in private from one teacher to one student. So anything that was taught to the masses, the general Torah, which basically included any area of halakha, Jewish law, any area of Jewish literature in terms of biblical literature, whether it's Chumash or the Nevi'im or the full corpus of Tanakh, all of the Jewish folklore, the Agadah as it's known, all of this was what is known as exoteric teachings. Exoteric literally means the external. This is the revealed parts of Torah, the nigla as it's referred to. Galui, revealed. And these are things which are taught to every single Jewish child, boy and girl, and these are mandatory to teach. In Jewish law, there is specific laws about who gets taught what, at what age, who is responsible to do the teachings. Initially, the responsibility generally falls upon the father to teach. If that's not possible, then the community becomes obligated to teach. And Jewish history throughout had a very, very strict program and system of literary, educational, didactical forms where no one was left untaught. And this was all of general Jewish teaching so that children growing up to be adults would be literate, would be intelligent, would know Jewish history, Jewish practice, and these things were ubiquitous. And this is all the revealed aspects of Torah. But Torah, we are taught, is given in pairs, just like we have the written Torah, the Tanakh, the 5 books of Moses, followed by the writings and the prophets, and the oral Torah, which eventually gets turned into the Mishnah and the Talmud and Halakha. So too, within Torah, there's another 2 categories. There is the hidden aspect of Torah, and there is the revealed aspect of Torah. So far so good? Can we get some thumbs ups? Is anything that I've said so far something which is fresh or needs explaining, needs understanding? Good, we got a thumbs up. Okay, so this is all foundational, just general aspects. What I want to do now is just to situate the wisdom of Kabbalah within the broader context of Jewish thought. Just understand where exactly its place is. So, along with this distinction of the written and the oral, which we are taught that Moshe Rabbeinu receives from God at Sinai, both of these, both the written and the oral tradition, which ends up being codified towards the turn of the millennia into the Mishnah and the Talmud, which we get the rest of Jewish literature from. In addition to that, there is the revealed and the secret part of Torah. The revealed part of Torah is what is taught to the masses and what is mandatory to be taught. The secret part is just the opposite. The secret part, according to halakha, according to Jewish law, is not allowed to be taught to the public. It's allowed to be taught in small groups, and depending on the subject matter within the secret aspects of Torah, it's either taught to 3 students, to just 2 students, or even sometimes just 1 student for the most secretive. And the process that it's being taught in is one which is very select. The potential student has to be of a very high stature, has to be very well versed in all of the revealed aspects of Torah, in Chumash, in Tanakh, in Halacha, in Mishnah, in Talmud, before they can even dream about getting to the secrets of Torah. And these students, it is not just an academic intellectual subject, but it is only for a person of refined character trait, of high ethical standing, high religious practice. And the student is privately watched and examined before being allowed to be taught Jewish mysticism, later formerly known as Kabbalah. Something happens in history where this all changes, which explains why we're sitting here in an open Zoom meeting. I don't think Rabbi Ashi tested anyone on their intricate knowledge of Talmud and Tanakh before they got a chance to be put in. I don't think Jenny was spying on anyone to see how they prayed and how they made a blessing on their food. It's free for everyone. And the question of how that changed, which is a really radical, a really fundamental change in the way that Kabbalah itself was conceptualized, is something which we are going to discuss. And when we speak about the history of Kabbalah a bit more, right now we're doing an introduction to the concepts, so we're going to be focusing more on the conceptual structure of Kabbalah itself. But when we talk about the history, it's important to understand why that changed and why we even have the possibility to be sitting here and doing what we're doing when this would have been really, really unthinkable a few hundred years ago. And that's a fascinating story for itself. But the fact is that we come to this point, and within this side of Jewish mysticism, within the star, what we find is we find all of the secrets of Torah. And the reason why this is important, the reason why this is integral to Judaism, most people think that Kabbalah is some sort of foreign aspect of Judaism, something that Madonna is doing, something that is new agey. Kabbalah is as old as Judaism itself. And the reason for that is because just like in the individual, there is a body and a soul. And in every relationship, there is a body and soul. For example, take the computer or the phone, which you're watching this interview on. There is the hardware and there's the software. There's the actual device. And then there is what brings it, there's the batteries, and there is the system inside that gives it its meaning, that gives it its purpose, that gives it its structure. Judaism, likewise, which is a living organism, has both of these sides. Has the body, has the structure, has the practice, which is, simply put, is halacha, is ritual, is minhagim, is all the aspects, all the activity which we do that goes into Judaism. But then, if it was just practice, if it was just empty ritual with no meaning, with no soul, then it wouldn't have any vitality. It needs to have both body and soul. And the soul is, the secret is Kabbalah, which is what we are going to be discussing. And the soul shows us what happens when we do a mitzvah. When we take a piece of matzah on Pesach, which is a piece of bread, a physical thing, that is the body, and we put it in our mouths, what spiritual transformation is taking place? What is happening inside our psyche? What is happening in the divine realms? When we go and we sit in the sukkah, on sukkah, and we cover ourselves with branches, what is the meaning of those branches? I think I'm actually sitting in a sukkah right now, for those that can see my camera. What is the meaning? What is the purpose? What is the foundation? What is the transformation that takes place spiritually, emotionally, psychologically? This is all of the Torah Tasod. This is Kabbalah. This is what goes on the inside of Jewish mysticism. Now, just like a body without a soul is a corpse, and unfortunately, Judaism, without understanding of what's going on inside, can become a corpse of a religion. Likewise, the soul without a body is just a ghost. And ghosts are very good for scary stories and for scaring people at night. But ghosts don't have much real world application because they don't have a body to engage with the world. Ghosts, if a ghost wants to take a drink from the fridge, it's just going to go right through the fridge. So therefore, just like halacha, just like Jewish practice needs Kabbalah, needs Jewish mysticism, so too Jewish mysticism needs Jewish practice. And for some people, this second part is a bit harder to hear because Jewish mysticism can be very esoteric and very beautiful and very inspiring and very transcendent, and one can be left wondering and pondering about great cosmological things, about the beginning of creation, which are all fantastic things and things which we love. But there's also the practical side, and that needs to be put into practice. And the genius of Jewish mysticism is the way that it is deeply integrated into real life experiences, the way that it's deeply integrated into ritual, which we see across the board with Judaism. The genius of the builders and the maintainers of Judaism have been those that have been able to integrate it with real life. And Kabbalah is no different. Kabbalah, as esoteric and as abstract and as transcendent as it is, which it is super ingrained in the mundane, in the physical, in the everyday. And we're going to see that. We're going to be talking conceptually. So we are going to be drifting into the abstract, which is okay. There's also a room for theory and for understanding and for meditation. There's space for that too. But what we're going to do is towards the end, we're going to talk about how this applies in our day-to-day lives in this period right now, going from Pesach to Shavuot. And we're going to see what these lessons mean for us in our own practice, in our own lives, internally, emotionally, in our relationships, in the way that we express ourselves to the world and to others, in the way that we go ahead building and creating things. And it's not going to remain abstract. It's going to be implemented. And if it's not implemented, it's going to remain a ghost, and it will be pretty, and it will be scary, and it will be wonderful, but it's going to drift away with the wind. So far, so good. Thumbs up. Are we all on board? We're on board. Very much. Thank you, Noreen. So, what are the fundamental? Let's do this. Let's give a very brief outline of the historical arc of Kabbalah. We're not going to focus on history. This is not an introduction to the history of Kabbalah. This is an introduction to the concepts of Kabbalah. But I do believe in the importance of historical context, and it's how I approach all of my studies. And I think we ourselves will have a much better idea of how these ideas work once we understand their general historical context. We're not going to get too deeply into the history because there's a tremendous amount of rich history, and we're going to do that at another time. But basically speaking, Jewish mysticism is kept very, very, very esoteric, very, very secret. And when we go back in the earlier sources, we know very, very little of Jewish mysticism. Jewish thought in general, Jewish theology, is something which only begins to be formulated in abstraction, in separation to its body of story and history and ritual, only for the first time really around the year 800 AD, with people like Saadia Gaon in his great first book, Emunot V'Dayot, Faith and Beliefs, where he begins to formulate what it is to believe in Jewish practice. People like Rabbeinu Bachya in his Chovos HaLevavos, which begins to lay down. But what happens in early Jewish practice is we don't talk about things in isolation. Judaism is organic, it's mixed, it's a cholent, it's a mess. So when we look at biblical narrative and when we look at Talmudic narrative, where we mix theology with law, with practice, with mysticism, with history, with anecdotes, with humor, that is how Jewish literature is generally structured. And if anyone has ever learned a piece of Talmud, they'll see that on one page, it flows very naturally and very smoothly from one topic to the next. The page has no punctuation. The page has no periods, has no full stops, has no commas. There's just a smooth transitional continuity through the whole thing. And it turns to later thinkers and later authorities who are experts in one particular area to look back at earlier texts and to pick out elements. And this applies to Jewish mysticism as well. So the very first glimpses of Jewish mysticism we get are in the Tanakh itself, most famously in the book of Ezekiel, Yecheskel chapter 1, where Yecheskel has a visionary experience. He sees the chariot of God, the Merkava as it's known. And this is a terrifying experience that he has upon the bank of a river. And he sees great beasts and wheels and fiery flames. And he sees a throne with an individual, a man sitting upon the throne. And without getting into the intricacies of what happens here, this is really the first expression of Jewish mysticism. There are many prophets which precede Ezekiel. There are many prophetic and theophonic experiences, which means where God is revealed to an individual, which we can say is hand in hand. The prophetic with the mystical go very hand in hand. They're siblings at the very least. Moses encounters God at the burning bush. Abraham encounters God many times. Moses then again speaks to God face to face, sees the back of God, and all of these encounters of prophetic experience are later interpreted according to the mystics and given meaning. But the first mystical experience that stands separate from a prophetic experience, where God isn't communicating a message directly to the individual, telling them such and such shall be done, such and such needs to be done, but simply they have some experience of the entity of divinity itself, is with Ezekiel. Just to clarify that point, the difference between prophecy and mysticism, which there are many differences, and this is a debated subject in and of itself, but just for the definitions which we're using here for now, which will be a good functional definition, is in the prophetic experience, God is coming to give a message to the prophet. God is coming to tell Moses to take the Jews out of Egypt. God is coming to tell Abraham to sacrifice himself, to bring his son up on an altar, and all of the crazy prophetic experiences that happen in Jewish history. The mystical experience that begins in the book of Ezekiel and in the book of Daniel and continues later on, but the first is in the book of Ezekiel, is where the prophet is not so much receiving a message from God, but the prophet, also a prophet, now as mystic, is experiencing a vision, an encounter of the divine in the full glory of the divine. And the way this happens is different. They see different images and different conceptualizations, but there is some sort of mega experience encounter of the divine. And this first encounter of Ezekiel, chapter 1, Yecheskel, becomes known as the Maaseh Merkava, the actions or the story, Maaseh can mean both in Hebrew, of the divine chariot. Chariot is a very rich word in Jewish mysticism, and later gets interpreted to mean all kinds of different things. The body is referred to a chariot, the world is referred to a chariot, but what happens is it spawns a very early trend of Jewish mysticism, which is very active during the Second Temple period, which is about 200 years before the turn of the millennia, known as Maaseh Merkava. This is a very, very general, basic sketch of a historical approach to Jewish mysticism. And many mystics encounter this Merkava experience, and they record their own experiences, although Jewish mystics are very reticent to write about their personal experiences as opposed to other mystical traditions. Louis Jacob has written a book where he collects these very select recountings of first-hand mystical experiences, but generally the Jewish mystics write in the third person. I'm going to try to speak a bit slower, forgive me if I'm talking too fast. I think it's a mix of my American father and my passion for the subject, which wants me to push me through. But thank you for reminding me to slow down, because these are difficult ideas, and they do need to be given over slowly. So Jewish mystics themselves, during the time of Bayit Sheni, during the time of the Second Temple, the Second Temple stands from about the year 500 BCE. It's destroyed in about the year 70. And towards the end of the Second Temple period, so about the last 200 years of the temple, towards the turn of the millennia, we see a lot of literature, a lot of dominant literature in and around this idea of the Merkava. And that is the first stage. And what happens is mystics themselves are both writing about their experience, and they're also analyzing the classical experience. The prime text in this case is the prophecy of Yecheskel, and the prophecy is a very intricate, a very rich, imagistic, mythological image with creatures and beasts and moving paths and flaming chariots. And the mystics begin to discuss what were the four faces of the animals that were seen. Why these animals? Why were they going in these directions? Why were they going back and forth? What is the chashmal? In modern Hebrew, the word chashmal, electricity, comes from this description of the chariot in the book of Yecheskel, because there's some sort of flashing energy, some sort of vibrant energy that's seen. One can almost imagine, if they've ever seen those sort of slow time-lapse videos of lightning clouds, that there's sort of the lightning in the cloud itself is flashing around. That seems to be what Yecheskel is using as a metaphor. Chashmal, which then gets adopted in modern Hebrew as electricity, which is now an everyday word, which has its sources in this mystical experiences. What is the throne? What is the Adam Sha'al HaKisei? What is this anthropomorphic figure who sits upon the throne? And the Jewish mystics begin to pack this apart. That is stage number one in Jewish mysticism, as far as we have recordings. There may have been much more practice of Jewish mysticism. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Joshua, David may have had their own experiences, but we don't know anything besides for their prophetic experiences. In terms of their mystical experiences, this is the beginning as a literary device which we can begin to analyze. And as we know, the Jewish people are a literary people. We're a people of text, and therefore text and experience are almost impossible to extract from one another in Jewish history. Now, is that all clear? Do we have any questions? I want to move on to the next part of Jewish mysticism, which begins after the turn of the millennia. But is that all clear? People are free to unmute themselves and to ask any questions about the framework that we've laid out so far, about the brief history that we've laid out so far, leading us towards where we are today, and then we can begin to talk about concepts. Does anybody want to unmute and ask any questions? Does anybody want to tell me to slow down? Does anybody any thoughts? I deeply believe, and I learned this from Rabbi Ashi and many other great educators who I had the chance to spend time with, that that teaching and learning does not happen without questions. Just one person talking and speaking does not work. The Mishnah itself says, Lo habayshan lomed, one who is too embarrassed to ask a question will never learn. And learning and education is not about good teaching, it's about good questions. And education happens more on the side of the student than on the side of the teacher. So I implore everyone to not be embarrassed. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. We will all one day, God willing, be long forgotten and long dead. Do not be embarrassed. Ask questions. And that is how this will come to life. And I promise you, no question will be a bad question. No question will be a stupid question. Please.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, please.
Can you tell me how when we actually do physical mitzvot, how that affects the spiritual realm?
Yes.
And how that works? That is fascinating to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noreen. Yes. The interconnection between the practice of mitzvot and the effects that are discussed by Jewish mysticism are a very large part of the literature of Jewish mysticism. Generally speaking, within Jewish literature, even outside of Jewish mysticism, there's a whole body of text called the Ta'amei HaMitzvot, the reasons for the mitzvot. And these, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. There are many sages who gave many, many different approaches. Famously, the Minchat Chinuch, Maimonides, Nachmanides all had different approaches to what is achieved by each mitzvah, what is the purpose of the mitzvah, and they had radically different explanations for what happens with the mitzvah. For example, Maimonides sets out a principle when it comes to interpreting the effect of the mitzvot, that he says all of the commands were given for one reason only, which is litzaref et habriot, which is in classical Hebrew to rectify, to fix the creature, which is the human. The human, according to Jewish thought, is made up of both a divine aspect, which is the soul, and an animalistic, a physical, a bestial aspect, which is our body and our temptations. And Maimonides says that all of the mitzvot are there simply to take this raw material, the chomer, the matter of the physical body and of the animalistic spirit, and to rectify it, to tie it down, to bind it. And he brings examples. For example, we have some very strange commandments in Torah. We have a commandment of shatnez. Shatnez is the prohibition against mixing different entities, and one of them is when it comes to mixing different forms of material. To make a garment out of wool and linen together is a very serious biblical prohibition and is absolutely forbidden by Jewish law. To take two animals, a weaker and a stronger animal, and to allow to put them on a single yoke to plow a field is absolutely forbidden according to Jewish law. To graft a plant by putting in one plant on another, to be done by the Jew himself, is absolutely forbidden according to biblical and Jewish law. Maimonides asks why. Why does God care if we take wool and linen and put them together and wear them? Like, what does God have against wool and linen? And Maimonides says that the reason is because we have to be taught a lesson, which is that there are things in life that are soft and things in life that are hard, things in life that are intense and things in life that are lax, and they cannot be mixed. They have to have their individual places. So according to Maimonides, this is an ethical teaching to correct the person. According to the Mincha Chinuch, there's an entirely different reason why we don't do these. But the Kabbalists have a different approach. The Kabbalists although they agree with Maimonides, they say that there is something else much more fundamental here. The Kabbalists believe that there is a divine structure. There's a divine structure to reality, which in a sense is all of reality, and which we will discuss when we get to. And something happened in that divine process where there was a rupture, there was a shattering, there was a breaking, and something needs to be corrected, something needs to be fixed. And what this means is all very enigmatic, and we did spend some time on this last time, and we will get back to it. But the Kabbalists believe that every mitzvah that we do is rebuilding the divine structure, is reuniting the divine masculine and the divine feminine, is reincorporating the fallen sparks of the divine. And this is all metaphors, which I'm just going to put out right now, which we are going to get back to and explain exactly what these metaphors mean and why they're all metaphors for one and the same thing. But the Kabbalists teach that every single mitzvah, there are 613 mitzvot, that corresponds to every single limb and sinew in the human body. And the Kabbalists speak of, so to speak, of the divine body. And each mitzvah, say the Kabbalists, is fixing and is connecting one part of the divine body, so to speak. This is a cluster of metaphors that are used to explain what the mitzvot do, uniting the divine masculine and feminine, fixing the divine. Yes.
That's Neil. I just want to ask you something. You were talking about shatnez.
Yes.
You were saying it's totally prohibited.
Yes.
But we do know that the Kohen Gadol had to wear shatnez. Is there any connection with the shatnez there? Why, from a Kabbalistic point of view, why the Kohen Gadol wears shatnez and we don't?
Neil, you touched on something which is incredibly deep, and incredibly paradoxical and incredibly important. And I want to get back to the history, but I'm going to talk to that very briefly. In the temple, there were many things which were generally forbidden outside, and there's very deep Kabbalistic symbolism to this, which were permitted inside. Shatnez is a very good example. Outside the temple, all the halachot of Shabbat, not lighting a fire, not killing an animal. In the temple, Shabbat was basically violated all the time. Sacrifices were brought, fires were lit. The most bizarre example is, what is the greatest prohibition in Judaism that applies across the board? Take a guess, Neil. There are 3 things in Judaism which one must give up their life for and not violate. It's not Shabbat. Shabbat one is allowed to violate. Neil, what is it?
Not bowing down to idols.
Not bowing down to idols, exactly. Not bowing down to idols must be one of the most repeated commandments in all of Tanakh. There is nothing which throughout Tanakh the Jews are messing up on as much, all the way from the golden calf and throughout the prophets, throughout the writings, and constantly God's reprimanding them. What sits inside in the holies of holies, the holiest place of the temple? What sits on top of the ark of the covenant, the top of top of the luchot? What sits?
Kruvim.
The kruvim. Classically, if we're gonna dare to say it, two idols. So there's a tremendous amount of paradox that happens in the temple. The most forbidden things, shatnez, Shabbos, idolatry, they're all permitted in the temple. And the Kabbalists have a very sophisticated explanation for why this is happening, and it's going to take time to explain, and we're going to have to understand more of the system. We're going to have to understand more of the system of Kabbalah before we fully understand the Kabbalist's answer. And we're going to get to the system of Kabbalah, if not in this lecture, then in next Sunday, because we're going to run through the history. But the Kabbalists say essentially that there's a realm of the ordinary where good and evil are separate, based on what happens in the Garden of Eden, which the Kabbalists spend a lot of time explaining and opening up. But then there is a place of the pure divine where good and evil are not distinguished, where it's a place beyond good and evil, to use a term that's used. And in that place, the paradoxicality of God's presence blows away any regulation, any law, any spot, and it's a place where the impossible becomes the possible. The nimna hanimnaot is the term used in Jewish literature, and it's in this highly, and the closer we are to the center of the divine, the more this paradox is manifest, and the more the very categories of holy and profane, of sacred and mundane, of good and bad begin to lose their meaning, and at the very core, idolatry itself become, and as you can see, this is a very, 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 very profound idea. But that's just a taste of what the answer is. Once we understand the system of Kabbalah, we'll be able to get back to this answer. And the beauty, I'll tell you guys, by the way, the beauty of Kabbalah is that there's a system, there's a structure to it, there's a logic to it. The logic is not a logic that we're used to. It's not a Aristotelian, A equals B, 1 plus 2 equals 3, law of the excluded opposites kind of logic. It's its own logic. It's a lateral logic. It's a imagistic logic. It's a mythological logic. It's and once we begin to understand the Kabbalistic logic itself and the system itself, a lot of these answers will make a lot more sense. Running back to the history, if we don't have any more questions, we're going to be transitioning now from the Merkava mystics to the Heichalot mystics. Any questions before we continue on our historical sketch, leading us towards the concepts of Kabbalah? Okay. Please, please, please do not mind stopping me as well, mid-text, mid-talk, and asking any questions. At the turn of the millennia, we begin to see a new form of mystical literature emerging. This is later classified as Sefirot Heichalot, the Heichalot literature. Heichal literally means a chamber, a hollow place, a room is a Heichal. Heichal, a hole sometimes. This is the idea. Some sort of space, some sort of venue, some sort of capacity, some sort of place where one enters into is a Heichal. And the Heichalot literature are written over a very broad period of time, beginning around the turn of the millennia and going sometimes being written up all the way into the year 800 in the Common Era. And what the Heichalot literature describe is a very, very fascinating turn in Jewish mysticism. And it seems most logical to say that these ideas and these practices were being done before, and it's only now that we begin to have them written down. And I'm going to talk about some very famous examples of this. But what the Heichalot literature essentially is the mystic, the Jewish mystic, descends into a series of chambers. Now, sometimes I say the word descending intentionally because usually we talk about mysticism in terms of ascension, going up, ascending. In Jewish mysticism, they are called the Yordei Merkava. They're the ones who travel with the chariot of Ezekiel. Remember, these moments of Jewish mysticism aren't divorced from one another. They flow into and they continue from one. So they're still using this metaphor of the chariot, but they descend with the chariot into these chambers. And different numbers of chambers are being given. Typically 7 is an archetypal number, sometimes 10. And what happens is along this journey, they encounter all kinds of divine, angelic, celestial beings. Typically, and Heichalot literature is very vast and diverse, but to give some sort of a sketch that sort of includes the main themes across these bodies of literature, across these different mystics, is typically as they sometimes ascend through these chambers, they encounter guardians at the threshold of each chamber, typically some sort of angel that we know from other aspects of Jewish literature, Metatron, Raphael, Michal, this one and that one. And typically speaking, there is some sort of interaction that they have between the angel and the mystic. The angel does not want to let the mystic pass through, but the mystic has some sort of ability, some sort of capacity, usually some sort of incantation, some sort of divine name, some sort of combination of Hebrew letters, spelling a name of the divine, which allows the mystic to pass through and move into the next level. What's very interesting is that many of these texts are read from the very earliest period, both as a sort of cosmological journey where the mystic is traveling outwards, but it's very clear from the texts themselves that the journey is an internal one, and the mystic is moving through the chambers of the self, moving through the chambers of the mind, moving through the chambers of their soul to encounter deeper levels, deeper layers of the self, until finally, at the end of the journey, they encounter the divine. They encounter God, typically a divine masculine figure seated upon a throne is typically what they encounter. Sometimes, in certain cases, they encounter an image of themselves sitting upon a throne, which is very fascinating and something which I hope to get into. And this again alludes to the idea that the journey is an internal one. We're not escaping the self to go up to the heavens, where we're getting down and digging into the self, into the depths of the self. And what happens is the pinnacle of the experience is encountering the divine the divine figure. And sometimes there's some sort of communication, sometimes not. And some of these cases are actually recorded in Talmudic literature, in mainstream Jewish literature itself. Most of it is recorded in outside literature, which we only find much later on by digging up old libraries, by digging up old genizot where texts were hidden and lost. But some of this makes it into the Talmudic text itself. Most famously is a text in Talmud in Tractate Chagiga, where we speak about the Arba Shenichnasu Pardes, the four sages who enter into Pardes, which means the garden, the paradise. Those words are etymologically related. Very well-known story. And they have these four sages who are well-known sages, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon, and others, enter into this mystical realm, and they see all kinds of things. They see two bodies of water. They see some form of sapphire. They see the divine throne as well, and this becomes the next important literary moment in the history of Jewish mysticism, following the Merkava. And along with this tale of the four sages who enter into the Pardes, the Arba Shenichnasu Pardes, we are given all sorts of new rules about Jewish mysticism, and the laws of how it can be taught and when it can be taught begin to be taught around this context. And as we said, because the Talmud is not a methodological book, it's not a systematic book that has a table of contents and it has an index and it goes from one topic to the next and it has chapters. The Talmud, the narrative just flows back and forth like an ocean, and we move right from mysticism back into law, back into stories, back into analysis, back into who knows what. But in that bubble of mysticism, we have this incredible story of the four that enter the Pardes, and this is done alongside with the literature of the Hekhalot, because it's done at the same period, the Hechalot of the chambers that the mystic descends into, and this form of the Pardes of the garden which the four mystics enter into is one form of this literature. Now, briefly to speak about this episode in the Talmud, the way that the Talmudic episode is generally understood, there's a tremendous amount of commentary and literature and analysis on this very beautiful, very enigmatic passage. And perhaps next time, I'll actually share the text of that, and we can read it for ourselves. It's very short and very, very intense. And we can also read the text from Ezekiel, also very short and very powerful. And that will give us a real grounding in the text, in the core historical text of Jewish mysticism. By the way, we're still going to get to the Zohar and Sefirot and Sefer Bar. There's still history to go. And then we're going to get back to the Sefirot and understand where they play. If you've noticed, by the way, we have not mentioned the word Sefirot once yet in the history. The Sefirot is a construct which only gets formalized and only gets taught much later in Jewish mysticism, which is why understanding the history and understanding the process will help us understand the ideas. Because once we get to the idea of the Sefirot historically, we'll see what are the mystics talking about when they're talking about going up, going down, and count what is a chariot for the mystics, and we'll have a bit more of a historical understanding, and I think that's super important. I don't think ideas are understood without their historical context. Now, the Talmudic passages is generally seen as a cautionary tale to push people away from mysticism. What happens is 4 of the greatest sages go into the garden, into this paradise, into the Pardes, and only one of them makes it out alive with their sanity. One of them loses their mind. One of them goes insane. One of them apostatizes, becomes a heretic, no longer believes in God, in Judaism. The other one dies. He doesn't survive. And only Rabbi Akiva, is the character who is nichnas b'shalom, says the Talmud. He enters into the garden with peace, but shalom also means he enters in complete, he enters in whole, he enters in with his entire being. He enters in shalem, is perhaps a better word to be using here. He enters in completely and with his entirety, which means both he inside was complete and ready for it, and he fully went into it. He didn't half go in. He didn't leave aspects of his identity outside, but he goes in fully. And he leaves b'shalom. He leaves shalem. He leaves complete. He leaves whole. Now, the depth of this psychological lesson is immense. And it's a lesson which we all need to think about deeply before we begin to talk about mysticism, because we are about to enter the Pardes ourselves. We are about to enter into the garden that Rabbi Akiva himself and his fellow compatriots entered into. And unless we enter in ourselves Shalem, we will not leave Shalem. Unless we enter into ourselves at peace, whole, comfortably, completely, we are not going to leave the same way. We're not going to leave with ourselves intact and whole. And people get into Jewish mysticism and it sends them for a trip. Sometimes what happens is it really can mess with people, and therefore going in with a guide, going in carefully, going in with preparation, going in Shalem, the lesson of Rabbi Akiva is important. Let me recap what we said until now. I think this is a good point. We've now covered a general introduction of situating Kabbalah in the general space of Jewish thought. We talked about the difference between the revealed aspects of Torah and the hidden aspects of Torah, Jewish practice, ritual, law, halacha, and mysticism. We talk about the necessity for the body and the soul and how they both need each other in Jewish mysticism. We spoke about the very earliest moments of Jewish mysticism beginning in Jewish prophecy and the difference between prophecy and mysticism. We spoke about the Ma'aseh Merkava, the very, very first literary